she comes. There's my friend.
Hello.
Hi. All right. We have people starting to click in and kind of join us, but we're going to just get going because we, of course, we have this recorded. We've had lots of people ask about watching it after the fact. And if you are with us and you can't stay for the whole time, we are recording it. We will get it out to you. But quick introduction. I'm Kim Surratt, and I'm just trying to get more information out there. We keep hearing all kinds of varied opinions on what the law actually is in some of the states for surrogacy. And I just want to help get accurate information out there. It's much easier on me when we do interstate work, when we really know what's going on in between states. So I want to introduce you to Janna Annest. She is in the state of Washington. I always feel the need to say state of Washington, not Washington, D.C.
The other Washington?
Other Washington, exactly. And Janna and I are just going to have a nice conversation and talk about what's going on in the state of Washington with surrogacy. And Janna, why don't you just give us an introduction to yourself first, though?
Sure. My name's Janna. I am, as Kim said, located in the state of Washington. My practice is primarily adoption and assisted reproduction work. I have an office in Seattle. And let's see, my own family, my kids are 15 and 12, both domestic independent adoptions. So I've been doing this type of work for about that long. And I will just add, as it's relevant to assisted reproduction work, I think we'll get into this later, but that area has really exploded in Washington since 2019 due to some significant legislation in that area. So it's probably about half of my practice at this point.
All right. Well, Washington did join us and revamp their laws in 2019, like you stated. It's exciting because, Janna, I mean, we're starting to see states catch up. We're starting to see these changes. Nevada was in 2013 when we really put a comprehensive statute in place. We had one before, but I don't want to tell you what it was. It was surrogacy, but it was pretty restrictive. Actually,
it was something.
Restrictive. It was something.
Hey, at least we have laws.
I know.
At least we have the laws.
It was, it was so restrictive. It was difficult to work under. But I mean, for Washington now, like you said, it was 2019. And so what all happened in 2019 for Washington?
January of 2019, Washington enacted our version of the Uniform Parentage Act, which, as we all know, uniform acts are anything but. Ours is actually, I mean, I love it. It's really comprehensive. It's got a lot of hoops to jump through, but I think that's a really smart and a really well worth it trade-off for the clarity and predictability that people now have in Washington when they undertake any parentage or including assisted reproduction efforts. It's just, we have definitions of everything. You can refer to the statute when you need to know how a parent is defined, how a donor is defined. You can look at the statute to see exactly what it takes for the court to validate or enforce a surrogacy agreement, or what is required for a donor agreement. It's just, even if you don't love every single specific requirement, I think having those requirements is just worth gold, and having the clarity, as opposed to working in a state where you kind of don't have anything. So you're sort of dependent on what court you're in and what judge you might have in that court. And it just leaves so much it's just so much less predictable and a tougher experience for families. So yeah, since 2019, the biggest change is that prior to that time, surrogacy was not allowed to be compensated in Washington. Since 2019, surrogacy is now allowed to be compensated, not just reimbursement for expenses, but actually compensated. Before that time, what were folks in Washington doing? Certainly were working with surrogacies. They were just going to other states. So
Right.
Wisely, I think the Washington legislature said, all right, we recognize the concerns and the reasons. Haven't wanted to do this in the past, but what we're going to do is, include in this really comprehensive legislation some terms that we think will, address some of those fears and concerns. But in exchange, we're going to give you a roadmap to do this, so you don't just go out of state.
So is it dramatically different from the Uniform Parentage Act in the reproductive section? Mind you, for those watching, Uniform Parentage Act covers far more than just reproductive law. But if we're just talking about that section of it, is it more restrictive, less?
It's not wildly different. I think we have some, and it's been a while since I've gone through and done a sort of a point by point. But we just have, none of these are hard things to accomplish. They're just very specific. The contracts need to recite exactly how the intended parents are going to fulfill their financial obligations. It's got to have language about, verifying that not just that both sides were that were offered counsel, but that both sides actually had independent counsel. Insurance requirement explanation of the insurance situation, of the medical situation in surrogacy contracts, medical and psychological clearance. A lot of that is the same stuff that you'd see in the other laws, but it's not that they're difficult, and they're frankly really logical. There's just a lot of them, as there should be.
Right. So if we're talking about, let's talk about surrogacy. I mean, obviously the remodel that you did probably covers embryo donation, sperm donation, egg donation.
It does.
In Washington, yeah. So let's start with the surrogacy end of thing. Well, now let's start with the donor part. Let's be a little more, methodical here. Most people start with their donors, right? Are there any special, are there groups of people that need to be concerned in the state of Washington? And when I say groups, usually we're talking about same-sex couples or individuals versus married couples, unmarried couples, any of those groups excluded?
That's a really easy answer in Washington, and the answer is no. None of those groups are excluded. Married versus unmarried, opposite sex couples, same sex couples, everyone is treated the same under the Washington laws. So that's a really great thing to know, that you don't have to be concerned about it in Washington. Also, no biological connection to the child is required, and thus jumping to surrogacy. But another example of how Washington's laws are about as broad as you can get on that topic.
So on the donor agreements, any special requirements other than having it in writing? And I say special when I mean, other than the just generic, the intent to receive and the intent to not have parental rights because you're donating, the basics there. But
that's the basics. And really our whole, the Uniform Parentage Act is it really all boils down to intent and the, contractual demonstration of intent. So, and that's frankly what I love about it. Don't we just want to effectuate the intent of the parties and have this contract as a demonstration, as evidence of that intent? That's what it's for. So, no, there's nothing, there's nothing that I would consider sort of unusual or traps for the unwary on the donor side of things.
Okay. So now contract side of it for surrogacy, special requirements, things they need to know about just for Washington, other than you really need to talk to an attorney in Washington. That's my advice.
Talk to the attorney first. And the good thing is your clinic, the clinics are, everywhere, I think. Pretty safe to say everywhere now. The clinics are going to shove you toward an attorney, sooner rather than later, because they're covering their own, what too.
Right.
They don't want to be the next case in the news. They want to make sure that that they're not caught in the middle of some later disagreement. And the way they cover their whats is with the attorney clearance letter. So, trying to think in terms of surrogacy contract requirements that might catch people off guard. Actually, one thing might be that pretty minimal connection to Washington is required. I actually don't know if this is the same everywhere else, but even if the donor or the surrogate or the intended parents don't live in Washington, if any of the assisted reproduction procedures are taking place in Washington, technically you can use Washington law. Now, would that be enforced if the baby's born in another state? I don't love it. I think it would be much wiser to have a contract executed under the laws of the state where the child is born, because that's the state whose officials you're going to need to rely on that agreement. So, but there still is that little hook for jurisdiction in Washington.
Yeah, Nevada and California both have that, which is where I'm licensed. And
do you see it used very often, where it's just the medical procedures that give you the jurisdictional hook?
States like Arizona, where we've got a lot more restrictive issues. The way I look at it, I try to go back to law school. I try to go back to that personal jurisdiction and that train track case that we all have.
The law, is that the long arm?
Yeah, long arm stuff.
Is that Pennoyer versus Neff?
I think it's something like that. I should look it up because I keep mentioning it to people. But it's as long as there's some form of long arm jurisdiction, some kind of touching of that state. It's when you don't have any touch. But I think generically, I'm just like you. I prefer, it's not my preferred method of jurisdiction. Definitely when people are moving around and changing or whatever, and it was what it was, that's what else are we going to do? We're going to try to help with parentage, but it's not our preferred go-to. But
sounds like same approach here. We do have you can't be a surrogate more than 3 times.
Oh, really? Washington. I didn't know that part about Washington.
Yeah, okay. We do have requirements for speaking with a mental health professional, obviously medical clearance. Both parties have to have separate representation. No proof of infertility is required to use a surrogate, which I know is the case in some states. Gosh, what else? There is no, and I think this is true in general, there's no cap on what a surrogate can be paid, which comes as I say that because it comes as a surprise to a lot of people, and I understand all the reasons.
Based on your history too for Washington, I guess.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it would be unworkable, I think, to put that in now. It's pretty easy to learn if you're going into this what some traditional ranges are. But we did not write it into the statute. We did not write any sort of compensation cap into the statute.
And so then, are you having the surrogate swear in the contract or just in the pleadings that she's not been a surrogate more than 3 times?
It's in the contract, and then also it would appear in the, well, it would either be restated or incorporated, or just sort of you by reference that you have that, and you swear in umpteen different places that everything you're representing in the contract is true. And that hasn't seemed to be a real pain point for people. But obviously that was one of the big concerns that I think held us back for a while from permitting compensated surrogacy in the first place, is the old concern about women becoming just baby mills, baby factory.
Maybe, All right. Well, I don't even know if another state has that. I don't think I've heard of another state having the number of times as a requirement.
I'm trying to think. New York came after us. They just
New York did theirs. A whole different framework than any
completely different setup.
Yeah, they're much more restrictive in a lot of other ways too. I don't know if they restrict the number of times though. I mean, I'm just totally going off the top of my head, so no one should.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head either. It goes back to the point for those listening. I mean, we are one country, but man, we are 50 plus different states and different laws in terms of all of this family formation law. This is all state law, and it is all different. Don't assume that anything you read online is going to be true where you are. It may be, but it really may not be.
So if we move out of the contract stage, of course, parentage is that number one, like, how does it work? What's the timing like? Because the contracts you've got your requirements, of course, but for the most part, the process of the contract, the first draft going out and then it's reviewed and then you go back and forth. I mean, that's pretty consistent.
Yep.
But of course, that parentage stage. So how early do they need to come to you? Is how in general, I realize Washington's a big state. Us West Coasters live in big states.
We do.
We don't drive across the states in one day. So
we do. So part of the statute is the ability to get, if you've, it's very easy. You can still do it even if your contract doesn't satisfy all of the requirements. You can still do it. You just have to show a bunch more evidence about the party's intent and basically ask the court to bless your contract, even though it doesn't quite comply with the statute. You disclose all of the discrepancies and say, nevertheless, this is our intent. We would like the court to approve this. But super easy if you have checked all the boxes that the statute requires. And what we usually see is there's no sort of mandatory timeline, but what we usually see is folks coming to us in maybe the 4th or 5th month of the pregnancy saying, all right, we're kind of in the safe zone here. We're pretty sure we're going to have a baby in, the next 4 or 5 months. Can we start the process of getting the pre-birth order of parentage? And that is, I love this feature of the law too. And I know it's not unique to Washington, but it's just really nice to be able to when everybody's, you don't have a baby and nobody's at the hospital, nobody's just delivered a baby, you've got time. You can have folks
Calm and collect still.
calm and collected. You have some breathing room. We're able to prepare the petition for a pre-birth order of parentage, which, you know, it's even form based here in Washington. We have some forms that the courts like to see and that are, you always modify them, but it's nice to have them to start with. So yeah, about month 4 or 5, we initiate the process of requesting that pre-birth parentage order, and that takes, that really just takes a matter of a few weeks, depends, what your local court schedule is for. We can, here in King County, which is Seattle, we don't have to have a noted hearing. Nobody has to show up. It's just, presented and the court gets it back to us, and it's a very well-trodden path, very smooth. Get that order back, and the effect of that order is to say that immediately upon birth, this is the intended parent's child. So there's no transfer of parentage or transfer of custody. From the second the child exists, the child is the child of the intended parents by virtue of this pre-existing
Order
pre-birth
state
order.
date of birth, yeah, or moment
Exactly. And then, the hospitals here all have forms for surrogate births that they, directly to vital statistics. So there's, there are always still little goofs and what do we do? And the hospital's never seen this before. And, there are those things we deal with, but they're getting fewer and farther between because this is just becoming more and more of the
norm there.
Day-to-day work. Yeah. Which is great.
So you said King County, no hearing. Have you seen hearings out in your rural counties or other counties?
I'd be guessing. The bulk of my work here is is King Pierce, Snohomish, Thurston County, the fairly populous side of Washington. And I do know that in other parts of the state, there are a lot more in person, I think, than the big courts are now. But I would add that in Washington, we also have a really, really permissive venue statute. So it kind of doesn't matter where in Washington you live. You can do it in King County. And if you're working with my office, you're going to do it in King County because those are the procedures that are just second nature to us and the courts know us. And so, yeah, real loose venue statute here, which is nice.
Yeah, when I lobbied and passed the statutes in Nevada, it was the best thing I ever did. As put, it could be filed in any district court in the state of Nevada, as long as the state of Nevada has jurisdiction.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Jurisdiction for sure, but venue can be.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's the answer? Counsel, why are you filing this here? The answer is because I'm here. And because it's efficient.
It's cheaper for them when
it's cheaper when it's more efficient for me. It's cheaper for them. And besides, don't you want our filing fee? That's right. I thought you did. Well, there's weird. I've never gotten pushback. I've never gotten the court, unless it's a really odd situation where it's a contested something and that's not a sister reproduction.
Our statutes go crystal clear. They can't say anything about it. But the reality is our big counties. I file in a very rural county. Which is strange to a lot of people, but I do it because we have a great working relationship with that judge.
Yes.
And our counties are busy. They're so busy. They're just, Las Vegas has grown in a way that no one ever expected. I mean, that poor desert island out there.
Yeah.
We made more than an island.
So. Well, and it's hard to explain to people going into it the value of knowing the value of the fact that the person at this court that you can email when there's any sort of glitch or question or issue, that person knows your name and will get back to you. That's not the case with courts we're not in regularly, and that's worth gold. The clients don't know it, and of course you hope nothing goes goofy where you'd need to do that in the first place, but that's when it really matters. So I'm with you. Stick with your home court if you can.
And obviously you have pre-birth order privileges. If you also need a post-birth order, can you get both or either?
Easy, but unusually, not needed. It's pretty rare that you need it, but I mean, once in a while, if there's, some states, if they're going home to a different state and then for some reason there's somebody insisting on a post-birth order, no problem.
Yeah, we have certain
totally redundant,
very much require it. So as long as they know they can do that. I do lots of work with Israel, and of course, I have to have a post-birth. They just really won't recognize the pre. But I like to have both. So if you think you can get both, that's very useful because I tell people, For the US purposes, you need the pre. For your home country purposes, that's the only reason we're getting a post-birth order for you.
And I would just add one sort of asterisk to that, or addition, which is we've been talking about gestational surrogacy, where the carrier is not biologically related to the child. We also, the Uniform Parentage Act also includes rules for genetic or traditional surrogacy, and they're a little different. One of the differences is that you can get the contract validated before birth, but then you get a post-birth order because carrier has
to her giving up her rights, right?
You have a little overlay of what we normally see in adoption, which is a minimum 48-hour period where she can revoke her consent. So they basically set it up to let you get like as much as possible done still pre-birth to make the post-birth part as seamless and fast as possible. But you do have those two stages in a genetic surrogacy. But that's a pretty small slice of the surrogacy work that we see. It does happen, but it's far in the minority. So
tell me, I assume Seattle has a primary passport office. You're big enough. Nevada doesn't have one in the entire state of Nevada.
I know. I think you guys have to go to San Francisco.
We go to California. Yeah. So, but you've got one right there in Seattle itself. So, okay. Good.
I know exactly where it is. Ask me how I know. I have spent quite a bit of time there, having nothing to do with work in the last 2 months.
People are just, they always want to beg me to work on the passport. I'm like, you really want people that are good at this. It's so paper oriented and it has to be so precise. It's silliness.
Yeah, I pretty much outsource as much of that, get people to the passport office as quickly as possible because I'm real limited in what I can do. My highest and best use on that point is making sure I can get them an Uber right to the door of the passport office. It's about 5 blocks from my law firm. So there you go. Can deliver you right to the door there.
Once they have an appointment, they like appointments there, people.
Oh God. Yeah. So I got a little PTSD from that.
What is the medical insurance scenario in Washington? What's it look like?
Let's see how to answer that. So, and you're asking about what I had said earlier.
Is it a friendly state? Do you tend to have problems getting policies?
We have the best case scenario for folks. We start always with, does the surrogate's pre-existing healthcare policy, if she has one, does her medical policy cover surrogate pregnancies? And that's, I'm sure you run into this too. That is, the insurance companies are getting wiser and wiser, and more and more of them.
I passed a law against it, so we're in better shape in Nevada.
Wait, you passed a law against liens on compensated?
We can't have liens. If it's a self-insured policy, they're an exception. They can make their own rules, which is really, they're an exception at a federal level for ERISA too.
Yeah.
But if it's an Affordable Care Act and it's in Nevada, it cannot have a lien and it must cover surrogacy.
Hey, do you want to come up here? That's for now.
States, I will help. If Washington, if anybody wants to do it, I've always said this, anybody listening, if you need the materials, you need the arguments, you reach out. I will help. More states need this desperately.
That is really useful because I see more and more policies where there are, liens or partial liens or just vagueness on coverage for surrogate pregnancies. So what our folks tend to do is, really depends what time of the year it is. Their best case scenario is getting a plan during the open enrollment period in the fall. We do have at least one, maybe more good plan offered by the state that does cover surrogate pregnancies, no question. The next step is obviously looking at a policy through Art Risk or one of those, which is, really expensive. I've had folks who, instead of going that direction, opted for, basically kind of a cash plan or a concierge sort of situation that, is most likely going to be fine, but it still makes you a little uneasy.
If you have any catastrophic events or
exactly. And, the insurance can really be, the tail that wags the dog in some of these things. I try to talk to my folks about it really early. You have to know what the healthcare situation is, what the health insurance situation is right up front, because that's going to be a massive cost if you're not prepared for it.
Right.
Even if you are.
Is Washington one of the states that has do you have any form of maternity state benefits, disability benefits, or paid time off for maternity? California,
Not
we don't. I don't have any of that here, but
nothing sort of default or baked in. No, I mean, you're dealing with, if she's employed, we always make sure we write the contract such that
disability policy.
Yeah. Exactly, if she already has one. I mean, but we, depends on the agency I'm working with too. Often they're connecting the IPs with specific, bed rest and disability policies. There are, if you have any risk you want to insure, there's a policy for it, and it's probably gonna end up with Lloyd's of London. I mean, they'll insure anything. It's not going to be cheap, but actually when they worked on one where it was really broken down into, there was it was lost wages, bed rest. It was really granular, and the premiums for those were not horrible. Those weren't the worst. So, maybe we're getting better, but no, there's no sort of safety net from the state. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's rare. I mean, I know California has it, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the few. I'm going to just keep asking that question each video, and we'll see what we find out. But
it'd be good to know. Yeah. Cause I mean, often we eventually fall the way of California on a lot of issues like that, eventually, but I'll keep my ear to the ground on that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So big picture, anything else people really need to know about reproductive law in the state of Washington?
I anticipated your question and made myself a few little notes. I think we've actually covered, big picture, this is a great state for assisted reproduction. It really is. I can quibble with maybe the fine details of some of the requirements, but broadly speaking, this is a really great place, a really great state to undertake assisted reproduction. I don't know if this is unique to Washington, but if I was somebody who was considering going into this, what would I, as an attorney, tell folks that they might not expect? One is really basic. These contracts are way longer than you think they're going to be.
Good advice.
Yeah, and I always sort of start out with, whether I'm drafting or whether I'm reviewing for the carrier, like, I don't want you to think that this giant contract means that the other side thinks something's going to go wrong. That's not it at all. I know this is like a scary thick amount of paper for something that I think everyone goes into thinking this is an agreed, like, we're not fighting over anything. Like, we all want the same thing. Why so many words?
I always tell people, I'm like, our job's Armageddon. That's just what it is. Sorry. My hope is you'll sign this and you'll never look at it ever again. And hopefully you never need it.
Yep. But you
are creating a contract to create a human being. When you put it that way, using a human body to create a human being, it's a little important.
That's exactly what I say. It's, contracts can be long because, people do expect something to go wrong, or because the stakes are so high. And this is 100% in that second bucket. All of these words do not mean that anybody expects you to breach, expects the other side to breach. It's not that at all. We're talking about creating a person and 18 plus years of parental rights and responsibilities. It kind of doesn't get more important than this. So our job is to think of all of the, like you said, the Armageddon situations and all of the things that are unlikely to happen. And the other thing is, relative to most areas of law, this is really new. This is a really new area. So we do not have, decades upon centuries of built up case law and understanding where everybody kind of knows this is how a contract's interpreted, or, this principle of tort law. No one's arguing about that anymore. It's done. We don't have that. We don't have all this, judge created law. We have a bunch of statutes trying to do the best they can. And then you have a bunch of lawyers like us who get together at conferences and tell war stories and explain that crazy thing that happened to their client, then
And
we
your
all go home
contract
and
just got another 2 pages longer.
correct. Yeah, we all go home and add a paragraph to our own contracts to make sure that that one bad thing never happens to our people. And then you end up with, 30-page contracts. So, that's, I think once people understand, the contracts cover a lot more things than I think, as you're going into this as a layperson, why would you know?
Right.
I don't know that life insurance and loss of organs and travel
I always
restrictions and
giggle at
lifestyle
people. I say,
restrictions.
look, I've done thousands of these. I'm supposed to know this. If you walked in and knew everything you were supposed to know about surrogacy and have never done
In
one
me.
before, you're either a nerd who really did a lot of research or you're just a normal human being like you're supposed to be. But that's what we're here for. That's what the lawyers are there for. So
Exactly. I just,
have to navigate. So
yeah, I think the primary thing for folks considering any sort of assisted reproduction in Washington to know is just, first thing, call the lawyer. That'll help make all the whatever else it is you have to do will all flow from that. And it'll just make sure you don't waste any time or any money, like going down a path that is either wrong or that's pointless. It's most people probably talk to you for free, but even if they don't, it's going to be way worth, the cost of a brief consultation. And again, like I said, if you're working with anywhere around here, any clinics, they're gonna kick you to a lawyer really quickly anyway.
right.
But if you're not working with a clinic, for donor stuff, all the more reason to talk to the lawyer. You really, really, really need that contract if you're not working through a clinic.
So Janna, I'm going to have you give your contact information. And for those of you that are listening in live, you're welcome to put some questions in the chat. And after Janna's done giving her contact info, I'll read her those questions if there's anything specific you want to know about Washington. I think the big difference, we did Arizona with Heather first, is that difference of going between a restrictive state that is a little more difficult and then a can do almost anything state. It just doesn't breed as many questions, of course. But
the Washington, you can do almost anything state.
Yeah. Well, believe me, that is one of those.
Kind of feels true. that
People
that may
always,
not be wrong.
Laugh about it. And I go, well, we do have gambling and we have legalized prostitution in Nevada. So what do you want from me? Like, this is what we are.
Marijuana?
Oh, and we have marijuana too.
Okay. You got the trifecta.
Oh yeah, we got it all.
We don't have gambling, but we have
leave us alone state. So,
leave us alone.
What's your contact information, Janna, so they can get a hold of you?
So our website is lka-legal.com. And the best way to get a hold of me is my email, which is my first name, Janna, Janna, at LKA, that's Lion King Apple, lka-legal.com. And if anybody is still interested in using the telephone, I do pick that up. I do talk on the phone still. That is 206-728-5858.
Beautiful. All right, everyone. Well, this will, we're going to render the video and Janna will have it. I'll have it on my blog. I'll have it on the Facebook page. Janna will be posting it also. And then I'll make sure I have Janna's information, her contact information out there with that also. And I can't emphasize enough, ask a Washington lawyer about Washington issues, because we all network together for a reason. We can't pretend like we know it all. And my personal opinion is she's right there. She's fighting the fight right where she's sitting. And the beauty of it is since 2019, not fighting as hard anymore. So
exactly.
Washington's a great state. All right, my friend. Well, I appreciate your time. And
thanks for doing this project. I think this is going to be an incredible resource. So yeah, I really appreciate the time you're taking.
Get real, true, accurate information out there for everybody. And I'm just going to keep hitting states, but I'm also going to start to hit some other harder topics. And if anybody has any topic ideas, you're welcome to email me at kim@surrattlaw.com. And we're just going to keep tackling it till we get everybody on the same page. So, all right, my friend.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
All right, Kim, take care. Thanks, everybody.